I recently asked on my Facebook page for a topic to do a video on, and this was the most highly selected title. If you want to have your idea selected for a video, make sure to join the Facebook page, where I will be adding another poll. This is a very important topic to be talking about because when it comes to training dogs, two of our biggest concerns are preventing problems and correcting them should they occur. But in order to do either of these things, we first need to understand how it is that these problems develop and what the most powerful ways are to stop them. Behavioral problems are usually things that a dog has learned to do that create problems for us. Some of these things may be in response to a stimulus, for instance, lunging at the sight of an approaching dog, or they could be ways to pass the time and associated with emotional anxiety, like chewing furniture when they're left alone. They also differ in terms of severity, so some issues may be smaller and easier to correct, while others may require lengthier training. One important thing to understand here is that from a dog's perspective, these are habits that they have learned, they are a dog's way of coping, and they don't necessarily think of them as good or bad like we do. There are many ways that these issues can develop, and depending on the issue, it may be the product of one or more of the following factors. I don't have time to talk about every single possibility, so let's look at some of the most common ones. All behaviors, whether they are good or bad, are ultimately impacted by reinforcement. This can be either direct or indirect. Direct reinforcement is when we deliberately reward our dogs by giving them reinforcers. These can be verbal, physical, or food-based. With behavioral problems, this process of reinforcement is usually indirect, which means that we don't realize how our actions may be contributing to the learning of the dog. For example, you may not realize that feeding a dog off the table even once can contribute to begging behaviors during dinner time. But some reinforcement can be so subtle and indirect that we may not even realize that we're doing it. A common example is the fact that many dogs experience verbal communication as reinforcement, so even telling a dog to get their head out of the trash, while it may work, has reinforcement qualities which we can overlook. Because ultimately we are giving the dog attention, which in their minds is preferable to getting no attention. For any behavior to be reinforced, it has to first occur. There are things that we can do to make sure that a troublesome behavior rarely occurs. If we ignore these sometimes simple strategies, a dog can learn bad habits very quickly. A common example of this is puppies who are given more freedom than they are ready for and then indirectly become reinforced for bad habits like chewing on shoes or furniture. Unwanted behaviors like these become reinforced only after we allow them to happen. In every situation that a dog exhibits an unwanted behavior, there is generally an alternative behavior that we would like them to do. For example, if a dog jumps up to greet guests, we might instead want them to sit politely and wait to be greeted. Instead of chewing furniture, we might want them instead to chew on toys that are made and safe for chewing. Dogs rely on us to teach them the distinction between acceptable and unacceptable behaviors, and many problems are the result of failing to teach them acceptable alternative behaviors. All dogs need to be exposed to many different situations. While it is not always the case, many aggressive reactions are the reflections of inadequate familiarity, whether it's with dogs of a certain breed or people with a certain type of hat. They also need to be trained in the presence of multiple distractions at different degrees of difficulty. This can be a challenge to do for many people and is also generally why dogs behave well at home and not always outside. If a dog ignores the recall cue outside off-leash, it's probably because they have not been taught that cue in that setting with those distractions before. By understanding how behaviors become habits, we can take many measures to prevent them from becoming problems in the first place And if they have already become problems, then we can use these ideas to correct them. There are some problems that will require consulting with a professional who has applied positive reinforcement techniques in the past. Since I'm not going into specific cases in this video, if you still feel at a loss for what to do, that is probably the best thing to do, especially if there is a risk to the safety of people or animals involved. I have said before that with dogs, a good habit is just as hard to break as a bad habit. And this is where positive reinforcement is really powerful, because we can take measures to prevent these problems from developing in the first place. If you have a dog that tends to destroy objects when you're not at home, it's probably best not to leave them with access to those objects until they learn not to be destructive. Paying careful attention to how and when we interact with the dog may be useful in understanding how a behavior is being developed or maintained, and what needs to happen to change reinforcement. While we are generally pretty quick to correct problems when we see them, sometimes we forget to interact and reward our dogs when they are doing the things that we would like them to. So instead of telling the dog to leave the trash alone from a distance, it may be better to calmly remove them from that situation, leash them for a few minutes, creating an opportunity to reward them once they have settled down. Ultimately, training a dog is about harboring a strong relationship, not just preventing problems. The more variety there is to your training, the better of a bond you will develop, and the more fun training will be altogether. Teaching a dog to do tricks serves this purpose. It provides mental stimulation and teaches them to be effective learners. This will speed up the process of training and help bring you closer to your dog, which means that even changing unwanted behaviors will be quicker and easier. Hey Celea, are you gonna help make the video? Well, I guess not.